Hello, these are flipped notes 9-4 on pro-social relations in our Unit 9 on social psychology. My Bitmoji is calling for help on the phone because this section is all about how do we ask for help from others, or more specifically, what makes us want to help others. Let's get right to it. So, altruism is our unselfish regard for the welfare of others, or sometimes we hear altruistic. What makes us be altruistic? The social exchange theory says our decision to help another person is based on how much it'll actually cost us to help them compared to how much we're being helped. Like a risk reward ratio. Like, is it going to cost me a lot to help you, or am I really going to have to go out of my way? The reciprocity norm says that the expectation that we should return help, not harm, to those who have helped us. So basically, we feel obligated to help those who've helped us in return. That if I help you now, then it's kind of the expectation that you're going to help me later. The social responsibility norm, which is largely learned just over time, is a norm that helps us to help others when they need us, even though when they may not repay us in kind. So when you just have that social responsibility, you know you're probably not getting anything back, but you feel responsible, socially responsible, to help them. Other factors that influence whether or not we help: the clarity of the need for help. The more obvious the need for help, the more likely help will be given most of the time. If you're not sure, then you might not help right away. We said most of the time. Here's a specific case. Kitty Genovese, in March 13th, 1964, New York City, was murdered. And it was kind of like in an alley, and it was late at night, 3:15 a.m., but multiple people heard her. Possibly as many as 38 people heard her getting killed, stabbed to death. And it wasn't a quick thing. It happened over 32 minutes. The attacker actually left a couple times and came back. A New York Times article came out reporting that there were a lot of people who never called the police, that they'd heard something, but they just assumed somebody else would do it. So the country was in an uproar, like, how do we let this happen? Like, this is all our worst fears about what it's like living in the city, that you're anonymous, that nobody will help you, that crime is just terrible, and that this woman's dying and asking for help and nobody helped her. So why not? If you want to know more about this story, there's a documentary on Amazon Prime that was primarily coordinated by Kitty's brother. It's actually a really interesting one. I've seen that before. And there's a couple of reasons, and this all came about after her death. Some other things came about too, the 911 system, and just a lot more awareness about the need to help others and to step up and do something. But the presence of others was a big factor, that there were other people around who had the potential for helping, and you knew that, or they knew that they were there. So we call this the diffusion of responsibility. If more people are present, the responsibility for helping spreads among all those who are present. This is what is going through people's minds as they're bystanders, which then causes the tendency that is the bystander effect. So the bystander effect says the tendency that when there's more number of people, that the likelihood that even one person will help decreases. That basically you just assume somebody else is going to help rather than yourself. If you see somebody on the side of the road with a flat tire and it's a busy road, hardly anybody stops. If this is a road way out in the country in the middle of nowhere, often somebody will stop because they know there's nobody else there to help them. There's less of that diffusion of responsibility. Other factors: just the personality of the helper, especially their mood. The feel good, do good phenomenon says we're more likely to be helpful and altruistic when we're already in a good mood. And I believe we talked about this in another section, like charity events where they get people having a good time and then they ask them for money. That when you're going to ask your parents for something, you know not to ask them when they're in a bad mood. So this is that feel good, do good phenomenon. Other environmental factors: it seems that being in a small town or a rural area tends to make people want to be more helpful. That goes in again with that diffusion of responsibility. Not being in a rush or in a hurry. When you've got some time, you're more willing to slow down and help somebody. Nice weather, again, that's part of feel good, do good. Having just observed someone else being helpful, or having just been helped themselves, that if somebody just did something good for you, you do good in return. Have you ever been at Whataburger or maybe Starbucks or somewhere else in the drive-through, and somebody in front of you paid for your order? I have. And then they ask you, do you want to pay for the next person's order? And like, okay, sure. And they'll tell you like how many times they kind of kept it going, which is pretty cool. Other theories about what makes us more likely to help others, the empathy altruism theory. People help for completely altruistic reasons. They just really want to help. And they're usually motivated by the desire to increase another person's well-being. Depends on how much empathy you have for someone. So we tend to be more empathetic to people who are more like us. So if I know a teacher is struggling, if I know another mom is struggling, I feel even more empathy. Like I can understand how they feel. Evolutionary theorists say that people help relatives because it increases the chance that helpers' genes will survive into the future. The experiment was based off of a state park in Oklahoma. And at this state park, they divided the boys into two groups. And this was intentional, it was an experiment. And they basically kind of put the boys against each other. Then one group, they had them like come up with a slogan and a logan. Oh my gosh, a slogan and a logo and a motto. And you can kind of see it in the picture there that we're going to beat you and we're going to be the best. So the two boys groups got real close to their own group. So they developed this in-group bias. And they basically had several activities where they kind of went against each other. And they basically made it so they really didn't like the other group. So then they wanted to see, can we make them come back together? So at first they just tried to do some activities together and that wasn't quite enough. So that's where they kind of learned that when we have these groups who are opposed to each other, just exposure to them is not enough. But then they gave them what are called superordinate goals, things where they had to work together for the good of both groups. They did some things where like the water supply at the camp was in danger and they all needed to help to fix it. So when they had a superordinate goal, they came together despite their differences. Another example would be after 9/11, Republicans and Democrats who were notorious about going against each other in Congress came together when it came to trying to fight terrorism after 9/11. All right, that's it for Flips Notes 9-4.